Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things. Welcome to another day of Vlogmas and welcome to the first day in my little mini author week on Charles Dickens' Christmas novellas. Today I'm going to be talking about my least favourite of Dickens' Christmas books, and that is The Chimes. So, as I always do for these author weeks, I am first going to go through a little plot summary / premise summary of the book. I'm then going to talk about the things I like about it and then the things that potentially I like less about it. So, The Chimes is not exactly a Christmas story. It was published just before Christmas, but it is in fact a New Year story. The action is set over New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. And it follows a man called Toby Veck. Toby Veck lives with his daughter, who is I think sort of 19 or 20 years old. And Toby Veck works as a porter near a very large church or cathedral where he regularly hears the chimes, which often kind of keep him company and make him feel cheerful on days when he is not cheerful. The book begins with Toby's daughter bringing him some dinner for the middle of the day while he's working and saying that she and her accepted suitor Richard, who have been thinking about being married for many years but putting it off because of the lack of money between them, have decided that they want to get married after all, and that they're going to get married on New Year's Day. They're going to get married in the morning. They've been putting it off for so many years because they're very poor. They and Toby come from very impoverished backgrounds and don't have very much money. And just as they are sat out there on the steps about to have their dinner, some gentlemen, some very wealthy men, come out and tell Toby to get off the steps of where he is sitting eating his dinner and start going on a tirade about why poor people are bad and why also poor people shouldn't get married because then they just make themselves poorer. And this kind of affects how Toby thinks about his daughter's potentially upcoming wedding and also how he thinks about himself. And that night, in a slight trance, Toby goes to visit the chimes of this great church. And while there, the chimes kind of turn into spirit goblins who take Toby on a vision into the future. So you can already see some quite close comparisons to A Christmas Carol there, in the ghosts showing you visions of the future to make you change the way you think about the world and to make you change your ways. Basically, the kind of premise of the book is that Toby believes that all humanity is bad, especially poor people. He is very poor himself, but he has heard gentlemen and wealthy people again and again say that poor people are bad, that they are poor because they are immoral, that they are kind of driven to crime and immoral lives and to further poverty by the fact that they are bad. And Toby begins to think that he himself has been born bad, that his daughter has, that his daughter's fiancé has, and that everyone around them of their class is kind of bad to the core, and that there's nothing really to be done about it. And he kind of has lost his faith and hope in humanity. And in the book, the kind of spirits of the chimes take him into visions of the future to kind of show him that that isn't so. That is the premise of the book. So, things I like about The Chimes. One thing I really like is that it is a New Year's story. I think it's quite fun. There are a lot of Christmas stories out there, but I feel like there aren't very many like New Year stories. You know, it's very significant that Toby's kind of spiritual moment and his kind of seeing these ghosts happen on the turn from one year to another, kind of suggestion that the new year is a turning point and a moment for a new start. I also really like the social criticism in this book. It is highly critical of men like several of the gentlemen, the wealthier men featured in this story, who think that immorality leads to poverty rather than poverty sometimes leading to immorality because of desperation. And this is a big issue throughout the Victorian period. It's a big theme in a lot of Dickens's books, especially stuff like Bleak House and Our Mutual Friend. And it's really, really interesting to see how it's dealt with here. I think it's dealt with very well, a bit more blatantly than you get in some of his longer works, but really, really interestingly and very, very powerfully. I also really like the kind of family relationships going on here. I like Toby's relationship with his daughter. I like his daughter's relationship with her fiancé. I think it's all done quite nicely. And there is also a sense of kind of community between different people and the kind of sense of people who are struggling helping other people who are struggling because they feel for them and understand them. Toby then runs into a man in the street who he doesn't know, but he's just heard some people discussing, and he's worried for this man's safety, so he helps him just because he can and because he wants to, just because he's kind. And you get a kind of real sense of people who are impoverished kind of sticking together and a real kind of community between them. However, The Chimes is my least favourite of Dickens's Christmas novellas by quite a long way. It's the only one I would say that I like but I don't love, and there are quite a few reasons for this. The main one, I think, is that it was published the year after A Christmas Carol. It's his second Christmas novella. A Christmas Carol had done brilliantly the year before, and he was obviously so clearly trying to repeat A Christmas Carol in The Chimes. The premise is quite close, but it's just much less good. The premise doesn't work nearly so well. The writing, I think, is less sharp. The kind of message and moral is a bit more convoluted, and it's just like a much less good version of The Christmas Carol. You get a vision into the future, you get ghosts, but it's less dramatic, it's less powerful, it's less kind of perfectly poised and structured than A Christmas Carol. And also because Toby Veck is just, he's not a bad person before the spirits visit him. And the only change that kind of comes over him is that he has more hope in the world, which I do think is significant, but it's just not as clear and as interesting and as easy to see as in A Christmas Carol. I think it's less accessible, I think it's more complicated. And there's also, I don't entirely understand how his vision of the future that he gets, or the potential future, would really change his behaviour. That's the main issue I have with the Chimes. I like it, I think it's really interesting. If I had read it before A Christmas Carol, I might have thought it was quite good, but when you read it after A Christmas Carol, knowing it was published after, the year after A Christmas Carol, it just reads like Dickens was trying to do the same thing again and didn't quite manage it. I like the Chimes, I think it's an interesting story. I think it's well worth a read if you're interested in Dickens's Christmas novellas, but it's definitely the last one I would put on your list. I don't think it's the best. I think it's fun, but not as engaging as the others, heartfelt, but not nearly so clever as A Christmas Carol, and while I am fond of it, it is just like a less good version of The Christmas Carol. So that is all I wanted to talk about, I think, today. Please let me know down in the comments if you've read the Chimes and what you thought of it. I'm always surprised to find that it seems to be quite a long way below A Christmas Carol in how well known it is, but the most well known of the Christmas books apart from A Christmas Carol, that always seems to surprise me. Regardless, do let me know down in the comments if you read it and what you thought of it, and I'll be back tomorrow to talk about another Dickens Christmas book.